Bible study that doesn't suck. What you don't know is that right before we start, I always say something really that makes other people nervous because I know when it turns on and they don't. Hey! This is Pastor Megan. I am at Grace Lutheran in San Francisco. You can check out some of our previous Bible studies at justlutheran.blogspot.com or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, blah, 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 Amazon. If you want to worship with us and you're in the San Francisco area, you can do that Sundays at 10:30 a.m. live or on live stream. And in the Northwest, we have
Pastor Amanda Zenzalo. I serve at Central Lutheran Church in Northeast Portland, Oregon. You can check out our website at centralportland.org, and you can check out more information on my work and things that I am doing at takemywheels.org. And our worship service is at 10:15 on Sunday mornings. You can join us in Northeast Portland, or you can try and live stream us. And if our Wi-Fi is working, you might even get to watch.
Wah, wah.
In towards the east, towards the center of the states is...
Wow, I don't think of myself as being toward the east, but I guess compared to you guys, I am. Wow. And you should totally talk to Amanda about Derby, because we just had a lovely long conversation about it. I am Pastor Dan Tisdale. I am in the mountains of Colorado in a little town called Gypsum, which is halfway between Vail and Glenwood Springs, if you know that area. We worship at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning here at Gypsum at First Lutheran, and our website and Facebook page are both all one word, First Lutheran of Gypsum. So come and check us out.
Yeah, do that.
Out here in the East.
Today's readings are readings. If you are at justlutheran.blogspot.com, you will find the readings below after I post it. If you're watching live, sorry about that. But you can go on textweek.org and it'll have all of the readings for each week. The readings come from what is called the lectionary, which is a 3-year rotation of Bible readings that happen in a lot of churches that are mainline denominations around this country. And so we talk about them now. The theme of today's Bible study is the highly sought after conversation of lepers. It's not really very highly sought after.
Dun, 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 dun.
I know. But it's in the text. So imagine that you lived in a time where you couldn't look up what your disease was on the internet. And if you got things like pimples in your adolescent time, or you got an STD that made rashes on the outside of your body, that to the world around you, it meant God didn't like you or that you were terrible. And basically, if you saw every rash that every person had, because we didn't have a method of like having makeup cover up or Benadryl to make your allergy bumps go away or your mosquito bumps go away, and you lived in a hot place where bugs would bite you. If you've ever been in a very crowded concert with someone who looks like they have something infectious on them, you don't necessarily want to rub up against people. It's just a thing. We don't like to do it. Sometimes that has been the yucky past of our world, right? Because we decided your skin color is different than mine. I don't want to be near you. I can't drink out of the same fountain. That's just hooey, right? So sometimes when the fear of skin anomalies is happening in a community and they want people to not bump up against you, it's prejudice. Other times, skin anomalies are something that are actually legit contagious, and so you don't want to rub up against it because then you'll have it too. What is commonly called leprosy around the time of St. Francis is something that was infectious, and they would have people go live on an island who had leprosy so that they didn't spread it to everyone. Nowadays, we don't send people to islands when they have things that are infectious. We send them to hospitals or quarantine units or we try to do other ways to try to help people who have a difficult immune system to get the care they need without being ostracized from the world. And I know that's not everywhere in the world. There are still atrocious things that are happening. But most of the time, if you have the chicken pox, we don't send you to an island until you're done having the chicken pox, right? And St. Francis believed that hanging out with lepers, because it was something that Jesus did, was something that he should do too. So he believed you don't climb to the top of the ladder, so you hang out in the rooms where no one's ever going to have something that's going to get you sick, or in the fanciest outfits, or eat the fanciest food. St. Francis believed that you climb down to the lowest part of the ladder. And so St. Francis ends up dying of leprosy because he's hanging out with lepers. I mention that because this was the week of the Feast of St. Francis, and because not all of us know everything in the world about lepers. I don't know why, but it's just not usually our chosen field of study. So in
It's
this
also,
text,
pick me.
no, go ahead.
It's
I pick Amanda.
also the week where Saint Teresa of Calcutta, who served those with leprosy, she has been canonized, which means that she has become a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. And the celebration for her canonization was in India, in Calcutta, this last week. Knowing that she was a human being and we have memories of her on this planet means that we might know a little bit more of her harsh edges. The large part of her life, though, that we can see is that she was she inspired a lot of people to do pretty amazing things, and that's pretty awesome.
I would say that the lepers of Jesus' time probably looked a lot more like the lepers of Teresa of Calcutta's time, because Saint Teresa was working on poverty issues of people living in cardboard boxes that were stacked on top of each other. And then the terrible amount of poverty that was happening was what was a part of the medical and health issues that were needed during that time. When Jesus was alive on earth, some people estimate that the poverty rate was as high as 95% of people living in severe poverty. That's why there are so many prayers about having your debts forgiven. Although those who have credit cards or student loans understand that prayer maybe just as deeply today. But this was a time where if you were in poverty, you could take someone, like you could just kidnap them and get a ransom for them, or you could be in a time of slavery and try to work off your pay. So it was different times economically. So imagine that if you are a leper, you are the least employed, the least likely to ever be employed. It might just be a birthmark on your arm that you had since birth, and you can never cure it, even if you had modern medicine. That is the reason that people don't want to be near you or who have ostracized you. And we have to assume that because we're talking about 10 lepers, they might be super different kinds of lepers. They might hate each other, but they all had to stand in the same entryway where it was acceptable to panhandle, and their life was really dependent upon the compassion of others, sharing coins as they're heading into the temple. But also, if you've ever had panhandlers on your way into the church, sometimes it can cause annoyance because you just want to go to church. You already know once you go inside, this is a time when you have to pay a temple fee when you go in. So you put coins in before you go. You might only have the number of coins that you need to be able to worship. And you don't want to feel bugged by the people who are begging you for money because all you have is enough for the temple tax. And in this same space where you are walking in and people are asking you for money, you have to change your money. So there's no way to walk past the lepers without the lepers seeing how much money you have in your wallet, because you have to go through these tables where people would transfer your money, your Roman money that would be used to pay like your Roman taxes. You change it into temple coins. So imagine it's the equivalent of being panhandled on your way to the ATM, right? So it's that kind of situation. So you don't get to walk past these lepers guilt-free, and they're completely 100% dependent on you. How do you raise the most money when there's 9 other lepers beside you? Do you have to make your leprosy look grosser? When I was in Mexico City, there were panhandlers who would ensure that they were bleeding outside of the cathedrals because they needed to one up the person next to them who might have a mangled leg that their family chose not to correct so that they could panhandle. So you can imagine how difficult and deep this dynamic is. It's not just poverty. It's not just chronic homelessness like we're thinking about now. It's an economic system, right? There are certain times of the year in the temple where you're supposed to give alms to the poor. So there they are on your way in so that you can check that off the list as you head to the temple. So it's a part of the economic system and the religious economic system that's happening during the day. This particular leprosy healing story is interesting because there aren't very many times when Jesus heals people in bulk, right? Jesus usually heals people one-on-one, not Costco style. So the fact that Jesus is healing 10 people is significant, right? And 10 was a particular number that would make you think it's the whole world. So it's the equivalent of saying Jesus healed everybody. He not only healed everybody, he healed the grossest everybody that could be found. And this is normally when Jesus is healing something, he spits or he touches or someone has physical contact, or sometimes they'll answer a Jeopardy question correctly, right? Jesus will ask them a question. Do you have enough faith? And they will answer a question, and then Jesus will say, your faith made you well. This is a really rare time where nothing seems to happen, right? Nobody touches Jesus. Jesus doesn't touch them. There's no spit. There's no Jeopardy question. In fact, these people aren't even healed while they're in Jesus's presence. It's an even harder magic trick where they're walking away towards the temple while kind of the magic being made clean happens. So Jesus tells them, go to the rabbi and show them that you're clean, essentially be restored to healing in your community, regain your ability to participate in your spiritual life and to be able to go to church again. I guess it does take some faith for the lepers to be like, sure, we're going to go show them that we're clean now, when they're not yet clean and they only lose their leprosy while walking towards the rabbi, which if you're someone who works in a church like Amanda or Dan or myself, you probably wonder who had to clean that up because it was probably the rabbi later.
Well, they had a little bit of faith because they said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us when they came. And that maybe just to get his attention.
Sure.
One verse says, keeping their distance, because they were worried that it was contagious, right? They called out, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And then he says, go show yourself the priest. So you're right. It's interesting that normally he lays on hands or he spits or something like that. You know, maybe he was worried about connecting. I mean, it sounds weird, but because it was still a cultural thing. He touches
other gross people.
Yeah,
right?
he touches others.
Other gross people.
He does touch others, yeah. Other lepers even.
And there are other beggars who are more aggressive than this. These lepers seem to be polite enough not to, they come close, but not too close to make him want to vomit in his mouth, right? Mm-hmm. So that official, if you're a Greek scholar, the official word for Jesus vomited in his mouth is splanknitsomai. It means his bowels were turned, and literally is like you had a feeling and vomited in your mouth. The fun thing is that in English, it's translated Jesus had compassion for them. So whenever you see the words Jesus had compassion, the Greek word means Jesus vomited in his mouth. Yeah. Fun fact.
So I linked a little article up in the comments, so hopefully it'll be down here if you're following us on justlutheran.blogspot.com. That is a link to the Jewish Encyclopedia article on leprosy in kind of the Hebrew scriptures and the understanding of leprosy. The difference between the modern leprosy as we know it, which includes kind of the loss of feeling in skin and perhaps the loss of digits, that kind of a piece, compared to what it could have meant in the Hebrew scriptures around things like vitiligo and that kind of an illness. So it's an interesting article to get kind of the understanding. And one of the pieces that we've been talking about is kind of this staying away from one another, and keeping distance because it might be contagious. One of the pieces that's pretty important to understand and recognize about leprosy is that what could be contagious is not specifically the disease, although as Pastor Megan said, you don't know, modern medicine at the time did not know what was communicable and what wasn't in the same way that we know now. But what could be catching is the questionable morality of the individual, because disease was brought on and caused because of questionable morality, that God didn't like you or you were doing things that deserved punishment. And so part of keeping you outside of community was to keep that bad influence, that negative moral influence outside of our community. And so I just want to lift that up. It's as much about keeping your badness away from my goodness.
Yeah, and sometimes that's helpful ways to talk about like people who are negative Debbie Downers just all the time. The unfortunate thing, though, with biblical history is that it literally believed disability equaled demons.
Yes.
Don't
Right.
believe that now. There are some countries that have particular translations of the Bible that mean that they continue to try to like forcefully, jerkily baptize disabilities out of people, and that's cruel and mean and bad. So you need to allow the opportunity to sift out, like a flour sifter, sift out the racism and the sexism and the disability, the ism, right? The ableism that is in these texts, and hold onto the connection that God is trying to make with people, that Jesus is trying to make with people. As Lutherans, we believe that all of these readings have a context, they have a history, and that the people who were writing it down, whether it was in their translation from the Greek to the English, or whether it was the people who wrote it down in the original Greek, have histories and contexts that they bring with them as well. And what we try to do is listen through the Holy Spirit to what God is saying today. So we don't just take the words of the Bible as 100% facts that we should replicate in every single situation of our lives. We believe that the Holy Spirit teaches us to look around and be like, I'm not going to be a jerk today, right? And so we do the best we can, and when we learn more things that are classifying our friends and neighbors in ways that are unfair, then our hope and our desire is that we'll also try to untangle ourselves from those things too.
Well, and I think the important thing to note about this is that Jesus is crossing those divides, right? Jesus says that Jesus' actions say that division doesn't hold, that trying to say that this person is unworthy because of who they are or how their skin looks or that kind of a thing, it doesn't hold up. And Jesus always crosses those divides time and time and time again. So if we are people of Jesus' faith, then our call is to cross those divides again and again and again and again, and to not believe that someone has a disability or looks differently because they are somehow morally questionable or unlovable or unworthy of our companionship. We are called to be in community with those individuals. That's part of it. I think Daniel wants to say something.
Well, I unmuted, but I like that you mentioned earlier on about Saint Teresa too, because that's kind of where I think that's where it kind of connects. That when I was looking a little bit earlier about some of the background of leprosy, I guess about half of the modern cases of leprosy occur in India. So here's a woman who came in contact with the most impoverished and quite possibly with people that had this sort of medical issue, and she treated them as kind of where a lot of this comes from. This is Jesus addressing them. You get the impression that the crowds are passing by and doing their best to ignore these people, like Megan mentioned earlier, and Jesus is not doing that. He's treating them as human beings. Now I know that the modern and the ancient leprosy are different, but it's the way people are treated is pretty much the same, especially in a country like India where there's this caste system where there are people, if you're below caste, you're ignored, you're treated, just because that's where you were born, or you're born to a certain family or whatever. And Teresa, what makes Teresa so amazing is she eliminated those things. That those levels don't matter, and that's what Christ calls us to too. So that's an important part of what I think this is talking about, is that breaking down of the things that separate us.
So one of the things that I noticed in India is that the most sacred ways that you can be faithful in India is to have rituals in and around the Ganges River. Because she's a deity in India, the Ganges River is a river that is held sacred by 5 different faiths. Even Christians use it as a part of their kind of baptism rituals. And so I drove about 4 hours each direction from the place where it's thought that Buddha gained enlightenment to go and be in the Ganges River. But before I could go in the Ganges River, I had to tell my medical people here in the United States, I'm going in the Ganges River. I know it's a bad idea because it's heavily polluted by dyes. It's heavily polluted by cremated remains of humans who are sent off to have a afterlife by putting human remains into the river. It has sewage in the river. And so in India, even if you are not the poorest of the poor, if you are the richest of the rich, and so you are able to participate spiritually fully in all of the rituals of your life, you will be sick. And so I brought with me my medications that I was supposed to take after entering the Ganges. And there are ways in which sickness is a part of all of our lives. I don't care how rich you are, you're going to get a cold or a flu sometime, right? If you think about the fanciest people in the world, think of the number of hands they have to shake, right? There's a video of Barack Obama telling his 2008 self all the things he wished he would have known, and it's on a split screen video. And one of the things Barack Obama says is use Purell more often when you are shaking hands with people. One of the number one things, he only mentions 2 things he wishes he would have known before he was president. And one of them is wash your hands more because you're going to get sick all the time. So I think that says a lot. So what I want to say is that it is beautiful and mystical, the ways that we believe that God can heal our bodies as well as our minds and our mental health care. I believe that God is always encouraging us to do self-care, and that forgiveness is one of the biggest forms of self-care that God tries to offer us. And we have to be very careful not to say that God is going to heal all people that are sick, because God is not going to heal all people that are sick. And living in an age, particularly as a pastor in San Francisco, where HIV and AIDS is still something that people live with and have very fragile immune systems, and particularly if your congregation has a lot of older folk in it who have fragile immune system where a cold might turn into pneumonia and end their life. We really do have to have some of the boundaries around illness that Jesus was trying to end, right? Because this is not just a story that tells us how to do church. It doesn't say bring infectious people into the church space and all worship together. That's not what Jesus is saying. In some ways, this is an eschatological story, which eschatological is just a fancy word show-offy people use to say end. In the end, when justice finally is made palpable and present in the world, there will be no more divisions between those who are categorized as sick and those who are categorized as well, and everyone gets to be in God's presence. That's not the same as saying, when you have the flu, please lick the pews, right? So I'm going to put a link down here to one of the children's books that we created at my congregation. Most of the children's books are things that adults should know, but you can read during the children's lesson time as a legit lesson for the kids, but that is going to teach something to the adults who don't want to listen to you. It's also a helpful book if you have any members who are hospital bound. It's called Too Sick for Church. And it tells you when you are too sick for church and why you can't come to church when you're coughing cute green and purple germs all over the place. It tells you why you need to wash your hands. And it tells you why head lice shouldn't come near the pew cushions. It tells you why the pastor will come and visit you in the hospital if you call them, and things like that. So at the same time that I want to say that God destroys all divisions between those who are ill and those who are well, and God destroys all divisions between those who have disabilities and those who have superpower abilities, I want to say, please don't come to church when you have the flu. And get your flu shots, because that is God's work in action. You getting your flu shot, if you are healthy enough to get a flu shot, is caring for God's love. You wanna heal people?
Heal yourself.
Get your flu shot.
I wanted to say make another point on that's based on this gospel reading, and that is when I prepare for a sermon, which this really helps a lot. I had missed doing this. Now I get a little extra work on my sermon. This is fantastic. I usually try to figure out where am I in this, or where are if I'm anywhere in this, and where are the people that are my congregation, where are they in here? And I kept coming back to so one of the 10 lepers returns that Jesus is thanking, and I keep thinking. Originally, I thought, well, am I that one, or am I one of those 9 that didn't? And I think it's an important point just to sort of take it to a different context. That I think, me personally, I go through my life a lot of the times feeling blessed, feeling healthy, feeling like I don't have these things. Oh, look, but then I complain or whatever, and I don't stop to realize the blessings that God has given me. I don't stop to thank God. I move on as if it's all about me. And I think that's an interesting direction to take this gospel reading, is that those 9 are me, are many of us, that we go through our lives blessed and forget to stop and find God in those little quiet places and thank God for all that we've been given. So that's kind of part of where I'm going with this.
David Lose, in his commentary online this week, in the meantime, is his blog. He goes with the thanks piece, and I had thought about whether or not doing thank you cards and actually like giving out thank you cards to members to send through the week would be one kind of tangible thing that we could do. Like what do we take for granted that we could send a thank you card for? And actually handing people the thank you card and maybe even giving them time to write it in church, because I mean, half the problem is that you might think of it, but taking the 2 minutes out to handwrite the thank you note and then put the address on it and get the stamp and make it go. For some reason, there's a million things that stop us from actually getting that done. So if you're looking for kind of a tangible hands-on that you could possibly do, in some ways, I don't want to reduce this gospel or this Old Testament text down to everybody, you should be more thankful in your world, right? Like I don't want to like just water it down to that kind of a trite piece. And yet, if we're looking to inspire to physical action our people, that is an option. I did put over in the comments again, and Pastor Megan can put it down under the justlutheran.blogspot. This is a little phrase talking about Mother Teresa again. This was put out last week in Dr. Leonard Sweet's commentaries at preachthestory.com. And it's a card that Mother Teresa used to give to those who served with her, alongside of her, who were considering, I think, the novitiate into her order. And the words are and I'll see if I can tie this into this week and serving people. But the fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. And the fruit of service is peace. And so if we're looking for shalom society, if we're looking to create a society where all have enough and no one has too much, and we're looking to create peace in our world and bring the kingdom to earth, it has less to do with who's in, who's out, who's too sick, who's not sick, that kind of a piece, and more to do with creating community with one another. And that when you find your way to faith in some ways, faith calls you into community through serving other people. And when you serve other people, what comes is relationship, what comes is healing, what comes is community. And in that community, that shared space with one another, there is a shalom. There is a place and space in which things are shared, and there's a commonality, and there is peace to be found. There's reconciliation, there's accountability, all the different pieces that come along with what we think of as God's kingdom. And so, yeah, however you may want to use this, Dr. Sweet recommends perhaps you can, and I did this last week, make up little business cards with this phrase on it. I accidentally left the fruit of service is peace off, and so it was a good way to have people actually interact, because then they had to write that on the business card, and so they could actually get that into their own brains, and then gave the business cards out during worship for folks to take with them, and have the tangible in their hand. So as we're thinking about what, one of the beautiful things about the Old Testament text that we have this week is the communal aspect of this text. And in 1 Kings, this great general has this skin disease, is not doing well. And in the people who speak to him are his wife and his wife's servant girl. And he listens to them. And I think that's part of the miracle of that text. That's part of what is so stunning about that particular gospel reading, is that here is this incredibly influential, powerful male figure who listens to his wife and his wife's servant and goes about doing the thing. And even, the whole section with the prophet and, why would I jump into your river? My river is better than your river. And again, it's a servant who comes to him and says, why wouldn't you do this? If you were told to go, do some mighty feat, you would do it. Why not just go jump in the river a couple of times? And again, the miracle to me of that story is not the miraculous healing of Naaman. The miracle to me is that he listens to those who are of a different social class than him, who have a very different standing within society than he does. And it speaks to who he is as a person. It speaks to who he is as a head of household. It speaks to who he is and why God's favor in some ways comes to him. Now, again, there's that issue of favor and no favor, right? And earning the goodness. So just caution on that. But the beauty is that by participating in community, by valuing the words of his community, by giving credibility to the words of his community, Naaman finds healing. And through, because he is who he is, his servants love him enough. His wife loves him enough to give him this information. And that community and his household are better off and a step closer to peace because he has participated in this communal action together. So there's just some more thoughts on that. And another, two tangibles you could do. Thank you notes. You could do this business cardy thingy. Anyway, I don't know how to close up. That's my problem. I don't know how to land things. I throw it. Y'all do something with it. I don't know.
You were reminding me that So as I was telling you about these trips that I've taken in different parts of the world, there's some videos. Maybe I'll compile them and put them all together on the blog spot. But everywhere that we went, I got into whatever water was there. So in Cambodia, there's a spot believed to be Krishna's shoe print that wells up hot springs of water. So there's me getting into that water. There's me climbing into the Sea of Galilee, floating in the Dead Sea, going through the Ganges, even though I'm surrounded by trash and it's freezing cold, jumping into the Jordan, even though people are getting baptized in white outfits that are see-through. Right. And so everywhere that I went where there was sacred waters, the cenotes of Mexico, right? All of these places where there were sacred waters, I get in. And when people say why, it's the Hindus that think that water is sacred, not the Christians, or the other water is sacred just to certain types of people. Or why would you believe that kind of superstition? And my thought is this: if it can help you, why not? Right? Why not try it? I think our world is so good at saying, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. That's stupid. Twitter, blah, 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 Twitter. There are so many people who are going to tell you why trying something isn't going to work. There's so many reasons why you don't want to exercise because it's not going to work. There's so many reasons you don't want to try whatever newfangled diet because it's not going to work. There's so many reasons to never try anything. And let's not do it. And there are certainly people who will judge you harder and punish you more because you tried it all.
And that's exactly what happens in the Second Kings reading with Naaman is here's someone who's not Jewish, not from that culture. It's kind of what Amanda was saying that and he had to be convinced. He's like, why, this prophet told you to do this. You may as well try. It can't hurt,
Yeah.
do it, and then he's healed. And
what if God is the parent and we are the kids who don't want to try the new thing? And we don't like it before we even tasted it.
We don't want to take a bath.
Yeah, we don't want to take a bath. We don't want to go to the amusement park. We don't want to sing in the choir because we're afraid we're going to sing the wrong note. What if the worst thing that happened was that we tried? What if? The opposite end of the pendulum on saying, why not try it? It could be great. Is this 2 Timothy reading that we're all avoiding like the plague or like the leprosy? Because the first line of it is, share in suffering like a good soldier of Christ Jesus. Thank you for those who have served. Thank you for those who want to be soldiers. Thank you for those who are good at protecting and who are kind and just police officers. Thank you to those who obey our instructions at church without saying, well, why? Because that's awesome. But it's the complete opposite of what we're talking about. We're talking about being generous with yourself with self-care. And there are a lot of texts supposedly written by Paul that talk about how you should suffer a lot and like it because Jesus did. Well, I tell you, F you, 2 Timothy, because, and Amanda and Dan don't necessarily share my feelings, but F you, 2 Timothy, because if it's true that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection saves me, then check it off the list, right? If the ultimate suffering was completed so long ago that I can't screw it up, then you can choose suffering or you can choose healing. And let me tell you, 2 Timothy, if you're someone who's like, I don't want to choose good things, I only want bad things to happen to me, then great. There's a part of the Bible that's just for you. It's called 2 Timothy, and you can have it. That's all I got to say about that.
Alternative.
Yeah.
So here's what.
What?
Here's what
Gonna say it the nice way? What?
No. I'm gonna say that that I was convicted. So a couple of, like a month or two ago, I did worship in the park with, it was my congregation, Central Lutheran, which as an ELCA congregation, you can make the assumption that we are 99.9% white, and you would be accurate. So my congregation and 3 historically African-American congregations downtown Portland all came together in Holiday Park across from Legacy Emmanuel Hospital in North Portland for worship in the park together. So it was Lutherans and Baptists and AME Zion and another Baptist church that all got together and had worship together in the park. And I presided at the table. And then my colleagues read the scriptures and preached. And one of the things that really caught me was that the theology of the day, you could kind of simmer it down, and it was necessary. And the preacher gentleman whom I care deeply for, he's an amazing pastor whom I deeply, deeply respect. He preached on how the negative things in life get you, you get through them and they make you the person that you are. And I was uncomfortable, right? Because our theology is very much like, you don't need to suffer, don't choose suffering. And what was convicting me sitting there in that park was that is an incredible theology of privilege, that we have the privilege to choose to not suffer.
Well, I don't, but
right, but I do, right? Like,
well, I don't know about that.
I have, as a middle class white cis woman, there are some tiny little ways where I will face discrimination, but comparatively to other communities, I have the choice to not choose suffering. I have the choice to, and I can choose a theology that says that I get to choose.
Life, yes, right? You are less vulnerable than other people who are vulnerable during this time politically. But mental health issues, pick whomever they pick. And addiction issues, pick whomever they pick. And cancer picks whoever it picks, right? And so there are some ways that you have spheres of privilege, but there are spheres of privilege that are not chosen, right? There are things that come for all people. If you read the second Timothy text as it gets better, like live through this because life on the other end is worth it. Maybe not because you're cured of depression, but because you're alive and people love you and you might be interested in something else down the line that you didn't know about. Fantastic. And I've been in an email dialogue with a student from Liberty University. Google it if you don't know Liberty University. Liberty University is where a lot of the Republican candidates announce their presidential campaigns. So a student from Liberty University sends me an email saying, I'm not trying to start a fight, but why do you think that you can be transgender and gay and that that's okay with God? And the conversation began with, well, because of these texts from Paul. And the last time I emailed and did not get an email back was when I said this. I said, the best way, if we could do it, would be to balance these ideas of suffering and bad things and helping it keep us in check so we don't take advantage of others, and God's love and forgiveness and claim and promise. But when the world on TV or the prevailing understanding of Christianity is that it's terrible and horrible and you should suffer, then to balance it out, we have to err on the side of grace and gospel. And when, as a pastor, I'm erring on the side of grace and gospel, I do that knowing I'm not the only pastor in the entire world. I don't only get one sermon, and every Sunday I have to preach every sermon of everything. I get to err on the side of grace and love and take off your cross because you've been carrying it for so long, because there are all these other really amazing people who are preaching that word so well that they're better than me. Right? They're better than me, and they're better than all of the folk who are trying to preach love, because it's certainly not getting through, at least in American culture. And so, and you see this balance tip all through history, right? There are times when people want abstinence and they're very rule and law and order heavy. Don't drink ever because people are treating us terribly and we're suffering from addiction issues in our culture. And so there is a counterbalance of people preaching about love and grace in response to prohibition, right? And there's these great awakenings that always seek to bring this balance back. And we see that through time. And what's happened with us is that the baby boomers were the largest group of teenagers that the United States has ever seen. And they had free love. And they connected to God through LSD, and it was fantastic. And they lifted up this idea that God's love was everywhere, that you could find it through sex, drugs, and rock and roll, literally, right? And they lifted that voice so high that the counter argument is what we are experiencing today. It's people saying, y'all went too far. That's terrible. Law and order, law and order, law and order. And we haven't rebalanced back yet. We're still getting the theology that was a counter reaction to the 60s and 70s without it balancing it out and being able to find this dance again where we can have accountability and balance, and we can be critiqued by God. God can be mad at us sometimes because it's so unbalanced that we don't have the ability to do that. So I agree with you ultimately that we need this healthy balance of tough love and overwhelmingly unerring love of God. But where I'm sitting with the homeless and with LGBT positive folk and as a transgender person, the balance is so effed up right now that anyone who says law and order or suffering, on you, right?
Well, and I think for me, it was this opportunity to kind of recognize that as a person of privilege, I need to not just think negatively or think that, well, that's a silly non-evolved theology like this, you
Sure.
know, that, and,
Sure.
and so I think what I'm trying to say to those who are like myself in places of privilege, who have just kind of erred on the side of grace hugely, and who don't live under the oppression that you need to find some way to reconcile. I mean, how do you reconcile when your child goes to the store and never comes home again because they were pulled over for some stupid reason that isn't justifiable, right? Like, how as a community do you process that grief?
Or the opposite, when you're a child who is legally a citizen of the United States and your parents go to the store and they get taken by ICE and put in jail, and then it's just young people.
Right. And so how do you cope? So for me to see the writing of Timothy, or, in this letter, these kinds of things to at least open my heart to the possibility that,
Sure.
that an idea of, suffering is there. It will make you stronger. You will get through it on the other side. God will bless you. As almost a coping strategy. It blew me away. It blew me away.
Suffer for the sake of suffering and you live
Right.
there forever.
No.
The idea is that justice is coming, hold on.
Exactly.
Justice is coming, hold on. And even if you don't get your economic due today, God's going to give you the first
down the line. And so
it's about seeking justice, not just for the sake of suffer, because
yes.
Deal with it, y'all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Complex, but I think it's important, and especially in today's world where many folks are trying to understand the Black Lives Matter movement. For me, this was just one of those moments where my heart was broken open a little bit.
Well, I think anytime we really take the Bible, we take the gospel at its face value, it is a challenge. And especially as someone, like you said, I mean, I benefit from pretty much every aspect of privilege. And so
You do. We've been meaning to talk to you about that, Dan.
yeah, I'm working on that. So, but you know, even I can't believe I'm going to defend Second Timothy a little bit. But
oh, you hate Second Timothy.
I really
don't tell your congregation, but you
I really don't like Second Timothy. But there is something about being that the gospel, if we really do it right, is a challenge. If we, this one line, verse 11, if we have died with him, we also live with him. That the gospel, strangely enough, that you know, we, even as someone of privilege, we do have these, like you talk about, these balances. We do have things in our life that are difficult. And I think the more that we really embrace who we are as Christians, we embrace our faith, the more we can make our life difficult, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The more we can kind of say, okay, how do I, and I think a lot for myself, how do I speak to the Black Lives Matter movement? It's complicated. It's difficult. It's not as easy as saying, well, I'm just going to say Black Lives Matter and see, because it's not my fight, but it is my fight. It is my fight, at least partially because of the gospel. It's not my fight because I don't want to be looking like, as a white male, I'm trying to take it over. But I also have a voice.
Maybe the better question is, how do I listen?
Yeah.
Instead of how do I speak?
I know coming up very soon is also the, I'm just going to put out a plug for the Decolonized Lutheranism conference that's coming up. Which speaks to a lot of this. Amanda mentioned that we're 99.9. I think we're actually 97% white, technically. Not that makes it any better.
My congregation, I spoke to my congregation compared to the national is, you know, a sneeze better. And we do have some people of color in my congregation, but not substantial amounts.
You should try having a smaller congregation. Your percentage looks better.
Mine's actually,
don't do it.
Mine's 100% white. So
really?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I want to make sure that we say with this Timothy text, because it is talking about soldiers and suffering of soldiers, is that I don't know how many people know this, but more police officers die from suicide than from shootings. And the last time I looked up the statistic, it was that 22 veterans in the United States kill themselves each day because of PTSD. And I'm appreciating the conversations that are happening in the political realm about how it is the suffering of our mental health services that we leave mental health care to police officers, and that changes the dynamic in ways that you can trace back to the Reagan years, when mental health facilities were closed systematically without options in place for caring for individuals. I'm excited that people with mental health issues can make more independent individual choices for themselves, but it's difficult when resources aren't available for those who do need care. We know that most of our homeless population in the United States is homeless either because of or after their homelessness, they gain severe mental health issues. And so if there is a way that we can heighten the conversation about mental health issues, particularly the PTSD that is carried on the shoulders of our first responders and our veterans, I think that it would go, I think, to the heart of what's going on with the idea of healing lepers. Is if there is something that is making it hard for you to reintegrate into your society or to stand down, that the more we can find ways for health and healing kind of in a whole body level, the more we can say it's strong to ask for help when you need it and give the message out that self-care is a good thing. I think the better it will be for all people kind of in our humanity.
It's
For
interesting.
those who are looking for a lighthearted way to care about PTSD, George Carlin has a really cool comedy sketch where he talks about the different names for PTSD based on different wars. It used to be called like heartache. It used to be a heart-related issue back in World War II, and then became a very medical, you don't really have it because we don't want to pay for it kind of issue. And so it's good that it's getting attention now. And so I just want to lift up this idea that self-care for people who are carrying unfair burdens, particularly when it's of a moral injury, that there is care and love for them, and that churches can be a safe space for you. You can have private conversations with pastors if you don't think that your congregation as a whole is going to be able to have that conversation in a public space.
It's interesting you bring that up. I live in the county in Colorado that is, I think, the second highest cost of living, second highest, in terms of income in the state, and yet it's also the county with the highest suicide rate. And so this idea of, so clearly there's a lot of privilege. Some of the highest income in a town is in Vail and Beaver Creek. There's just a lot of wealth there, but yeah, there's also a high suicide rate. We sponsored a hockey game, which was a supported charity called Speak Up, Reach Out in the area, which is suicide prevention, suicide hotline. And it's interesting because everyone who played, all the hockey players are first responders. First responders, the rate of suicide in first responders is extremely high, especially in areas where they're having to deal with suicide, with other kind of tragedies that way. And around here, it's we have 3 members of this little tiny congregation. We have 3 members who work really closely with first responders. With 2 work with the ambulance service, and one works with the sheriff's department. And the pastor who's in Vail is also on the mountain rescue team. And so I hear weekly about issues with suicide, people who have died, who are co-workers of these people, who are members of my congregation. And so there is sort of a tie with that idea of, even when there's privilege, there's underlying issues of grief, there's mental illness issues, there's all sorts of things that are tied up in it. So I kind of like Amanda, I'm trying to figure out a way to finish this, but it's such a broad concept. Privilege is not as simple as just, people have a lot of money and they're very white, that there are other things that are going on. So that's something that we have to deal with every day here where I live.
So I happen to think not being able to resolve our own issues of privilege and the systematic racism that we are part of is great. Because if we felt like we could resolve it all, or we could tie it up in a neat little bow, we'd be lying to ourselves. And so thank you, everyone who has come to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. Best we can, we come each Wednesday-ish around 10-ish or so. So if you want to check us out live, you can. If you want to check us out on the playback on YouTube, you can. You can subscribe down here if you're on YouTube, and get them delivered regularly. So thank you again. I hope you are contemplating your own space in life, that you're giving yourself self-care when you need it, and pondering your own personal privilege as well, so that you can care for other people. Peace out, y'all.